Ladies and gentlemen, very good morning to you all to this keynote session. My name is Sheil Coley. I am the Head of Corporate Communications for Asia Pacific at Credit Suisse. I'm very, very excited to introduce you to our first ever astronauts to the AIC. We are very delighted to have with us Chief Pilot Dave Mackay and Commercial Director Stephen Attenborough of Virgin Galactic. They will be talking to us today about the commercial reality of space travel and just how quickly this could become the next ultimate travel destination. Virgin Galactic is obviously part of Richard Branson's Virgin Group, which is on track to become the world's first passenger-carrying commercial space line. Like many astronauts, Mr. Mackay has a history as a test pilot. He has 15 years' experience with the Royal Air Force, and he carried out some of the first trial flights on the Harrier GR7, the Sea Harrier FA2, and the Toscano basic trainer aircraft. In 1992, he became Officer Commanding Fast Jet Test Pilot, and in the same year was awarded the Air Force Cross, which is quite a significant honor. In 1993, Mr. Mackay became an instructor at the Empire Test Pilot School, becoming Principal Fixed Wing Tutor in 1994. He retired in 1995 and joined Virgin Atlantic and became a captain of a Boeing 747, and then later on the Airbus A340. He soon became involved in the Virgin Galactic project after it was first conceived, and has flown the Spaceship One simulator, and in 2009 he joined the team full-time as its test pilot. In 2011, he was made chief pilot. The interesting thing about Mr. Mackay is that he also likes to fly historic aircraft and display planes. He's flown, in fact, over 130 different types of aircraft, ranging from the world's oldest original flying aircraft, the 1909 Blériot. So you could say he's flown the oldest plane in the world and is about to fly the newest and most modern and most technically advanced. Our other speaker today is Stephen Attenborough. He was Virgin Galactic's first full-time employee and put in place the commercial foundations of the business to create a brand new market for private space travel. He leads a team that covers sales, marketing, customer care, communications, and partnerships for the space tourism business. Virgin Galactic has now attracted over 700 future astronauts from more than 50 countries who have paid about $80 million in deposits. He is also responsible for work streams that are investigating and building non-tourism applications for the new space vehicles, particularly science research. He was also part of the team that secured Virgin Galactic's first external equity partnership with a sale of a 38% stake to Abu Dhabi's Aba Investments. That valued Virgin Galactic at that time at about $1 billion. That was in 2010. In late 2014, he also took responsibility for managing the external communications with global media and other stakeholders following the tragic test flight incident in the Mojave Desert late last year. With investment in commercial spaceflight, one of the key areas of interest among wealthy individuals, and with the range of investment opportunities opening up for those who want to gain exposure to space through their portfolios, both Mr. Mackay and Mr. Attenborough will be able to share with us their first-hand experiences of efforts to make space travel and exploration a commercial reality. They will also reflect on, obviously, the significant risks that have to be managed in the pursuit of this breakthrough, and look ahead to some of the future applications, including suborbital intercontinental travel, fast, low-cost, small satellite launch, as well as orbital hotels and science research stations. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dave Mackay and Stephen Attenborough to the AIC.
Good morning, everybody. It's just me at the moment. I'm Stephen Attenborough. You'll see Dave, who got a much more exciting write-up, I thought, this morning than me, but you'll see him in a second, so you're just going to have to wait for that. Actually, thank you so much for that, that very kind introduction. Dave and I actually only spoke together once before, so this is a little bit new for us. The introduction we got last time was a little less polite and full than this one. I think the guy on stage said, please welcome the buy it and the fly it from Virgin Galactic, so, which was pretty clever, but not as nice as that one. And actually, I should also say, just to follow up on that introduction that Sheil gave, that with unusual modesty in banking circles, he failed to mention that it was actually Credit Suisse that helped us with that deal with ABBA back in 2010, so thank you very much for that. It was a tremendous piece of work. So, space is virgin territory. I'm going to start off with something that will probably fill you with dread on a Friday morning, which is a little bit of audience participation, so sorry about that. So it only involves a hand raising, you don't need to say anything. Two very quick questions. So the first question is that assuming you could afford it, and I'm pretty sure you can, and that you knew you were going to come back safely, how many of you would like to take the rocket ride into the blackness of space, float around in zero gravity, look down on stunning views of the Earth, and come back an astronaut? Quick raising hands. Fantastic. I do this everywhere I go because we're a 10-year startup and we've got no money for market research, so this is the way we have to do it. Second question, and there's a very honest reply here, very honest reply. How many of you really think that you will be an astronaut? One. And you know, this is I love the way that humans react, because this is, you can go anywhere in the world, any demographic, and you'll get exactly that reply. Everybody wants to go, nobody thinks they're going to. And that is the reason we're here. So yet again, the rationale for Virgin Galactic seems to be a sound one, which is a relief. Second thing this morning is that I'm going to show you something which will be, this is the most amazing thing you've certainly seen at this conference. It's probably the most amazing photo you have ever seen in your lives, because it consists of three things that are complete firsts. They've never happened before, and they are potentially the very tangible proof of something very big to come. And so let me go through those things, three simple things. First of all, on the left-hand side, as you look at the screen, you can see the sidewall of the magnificent Spaceport America in New Mexico. Designed by Foster & Partners, this building has only been constructed, funded and constructed. It's sitting in the beautiful New Mexico desert with a 12,000-foot runway in front of it. And it has only been built to take you and me to space, to train you, to send you off and to receive you back as an astronaut. And it's there, and it's real. It's the world's first purpose-built commercial spaceport, and it's absolutely fantastic. The second thing behind this group of people is the world's very first privately built commercial human spacecraft. It's the world's first genuine reusable commercial spacecraft, and it is being built purely to take you and me to space. And perhaps most fantastically, there in the front of the picture are a group of some of those 700 future astronauts that Sheil mentioned, who have paid up, reserved their places, become the pioneers for a new industry. And so for anybody that says, and occasionally people do say to me, this is just another PR stunt from Richard Branson, I generally show them this slide because this is very, very real. But let's take a step back. I joined, as Sheil said, Virgin Galactic back in 2004. I actually came from the fund management industry, actually, so it's a little bit like coming home today. And I was on gardening leave. Somebody I knew at Virgin gave me a call and asked me whether I could come and help them get this extraordinary company off the ground for maybe 2 or 3 months. And here I am almost 11 years later. But it was, I went along, I think, with very little knowledge of what this was all about. I met Richard for the first time in his house in Notting Hill. We had a cup of tea, and he started talking to me about his plans for space and for Virgin Galactic. And two things were going through my mind at the time. The first was, this is probably the craziest thing I've ever heard. And the second was that I'd really love to be a part of it. And as I was thinking about the crazy bit, I was reminded of a story. I'd skimmed through his autobiography quickly before meeting him. And there was a lovely story in there about Richard talking at a conference a bit like this, perhaps, doing question and answers. And somebody put their hand up and said, I think it was a young guy, put his hand up and said, Richard, how do you become a millionaire? Just tell me how I can become a millionaire. And so Richard said, that's very, very easy. All you need to do is to become a billionaire and then start an airline. And this story was going through my mind because I thought, if that's what happens with airlines, it's, you know, it's sure as hell is going to happen with a space line. But then as he started talking about it a little bit more, I sort of started to understand that how this sort of fitted into his mind and how in many ways this was the ultimate Virgin business. Virgin, as many of you know, is a fairly extraordinary brand. It's one of the very few brands in the world that you can really sort of stick any business on the end of, you know, whether it's a record label or a hotels business, an airline or whatever. And there comes with an expectation that that product or service will be delivered in a particular way. Richard has built this brand over 30 or 40 years. He loves a challenge. He's done some pretty crazy things in his life. But I think when it comes to business, he generally starts not by saying, how are we going to make money out of this? What is the exact business model? You know, is it going to really make sense financially? But he comes at it really, is there a need there? Is it something we're going to have fun doing? Is it something we're interested in? And typically looks at businesses where consumers are being served badly. Either the incumbents have become lazy or become a bit of a cartel. They just haven't innovated, but they're serving their businesses badly. Virgin Atlantic is a great example. You know, Richard was flying across the Atlantic doing record business, you know, many times, and sort of became aware that it was a really terrible experience. You know, you always got to Heathrow or JFK, wherever you're going. From an engineering perspective, it was going fine. It was safe. But the airlines were treating their companies as engineering companies, which had some incidental human cargo. And that human cargo really wasn't thought about at all. And he sat there and he said, you know, I think we could make this a little bit better. And let's give it a go. So went into a very, very difficult industry, picked up the phone, managed to get hold of a 747, made the experience better, innovated the customer experience, and with a few lumps and bumps along the way, you know, ended up with a fabulous airline, the second largest long-haul carrier out of the UK, and a wonderful story. And it seemed to me, sort of thinking through this sort of Virgin ethos, that space was the ultimate Virgin business, because although we have been putting men and women, mostly men, of course, as always, but men and women into space for the last half a century or so, there have been very, very few of them. This may be a little bit out of date, but still fewer than 550 people in the space of over sort of 50 years have had that incredible experience that I described, and you all want to have yourselves. And none of them have got there by accident. Dave will tell you a little bit about how he wanted to become an astronaut, and that's a very typical story. You know, people have had to sweat and believe and work and just position themselves, you know, from day one to get onto this list. And behind this list are many thousands of people that did exactly that and still didn't go. And so this is an industry which is incredibly badly served, because as we saw just now, we all want to go to space, but only 542 superhumans have been able to go there. So what a perfect business. Let's go in there, see if we can shake it up a bit, you know, change things around and give all of us who want to go the opportunity to do so. So having had the experience of Virgin Atlantic, we thought, well, what we need to go and get is a rocket, basically, and we'll put Virgin on it. We'll sign up some people, and we'll make the experience wonderful, and that should be fine. And so we went and looked at rockets, and I'm really sort of simplifying this. But, and it became very aware very, very quickly that the technology out there was never going to work for us as a commercial space line, because we knew from day one, if we were going to get this right, we were going to have to do it safely, and we were going to have to do it within a commercially viable framework. We were going to need to make money. And one of the really strange things about space access, although that it has influenced just about every area of life, if we turned the space button off today, a lot of things wouldn't work. Life would be very, very different. So it's been incredibly influential. But the vehicles that get people and payload into space really haven't changed much over 50, 60 years. And that's strange, because if you think about other areas which have started in government control, mobile telephones, for example, if the same had happened as has happened with space vehicles, we would still be carrying around a suitcase with a receiver on the top rather than an iPhone in our pockets. So, and this is a great photo which demonstrates this. So this is Yuri Gagarin taking off in 1961, and a modern Soyuz taking off in 2012. And it pretty much looks like the only development during that time is a red stripe around the... which is probably not quite true, but you get the point. Fate was on our side because, we went away from these trips a little concerned that actually the great plans to go into this area and do something, were going to be thwarted at the first turn, because there was just no technology out there which would do the job. We then came across a guy called Burt Rutan. Burt Rutan, I think, is one of the few people I've certainly met that probably merits the title of genius. He's been running a company called Scale Composites for many years. He's retired now, actually. And this was a company based up in the Mojave Desert, north of Los Angeles, and had been churning out the most extraordinary, successful, innovative aviation vehicles, probably anywhere in the world, also with a very deep understanding of how to use carbon composite materials in that field. Now, Burt was doing a project for us that Dave was involved with, actually, for Steve Fossett, building a plane to go around the world on a single tank of fuel. And we became aware that he was competing for a prize called the X Prize. And this prize was trying to break the paradigm of human spaceflight. And the prize basically said, look, anybody can build a spaceship privately, no government money, that can put a man into space, bring them back again, and do the same within 14 days, then $10 million is yours. And we became excited about that, and we became particularly excited by the way that Burt Rutan was thinking about this, because the really hard things about space, and space is hard, and I think certainly the journey for me to date in the last 10 years has been defined by that, the road to space is long and hard. It's cutting edge, it's frontier stuff. But the way that the most difficult things historically about about space travel have been the bit about getting there and the bit about coming back. It's those two phases which are really, really difficult, particularly if you want to have a vehicle you can use many, many times, which is key to commercial viability. So anyway, the way that Burt was thinking about this, we loved. He built a little prototype called Spaceship One to compete for the prize. We sponsored its final flight, as you can see there. And on October the 4th, this strange little aviation vehicle did something that the world's three most powerful governments had not done, in the history of space travel. He put a man into space, brought him back again, and less than 14 days used the same vehicle to put another guy into space and brought him back successfully. And that was an incredibly exciting day for us, because we had agreed with Burt Rutan before those flights that if he was successful in winning the $10 million X Prize, then we would work with him to build a commercial version, and Virgin Galactic was off to the races. At which point, I'm going to hand over to Dave Mackay to talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Stephen. So thank you, Stephen, and good morning, everyone. So here we are in early 2004, or late 2004, with a very successful prototype vehicle, which Burt Rutan now thinks he can develop into something larger and more commercially viable. So this is what we're building and testing at the moment. So Spaceship 2, as you can see, is about twice the size of Spaceship 1, but it uses the same proven technology that Spaceship 1 did. But it was designed around the passenger experience. So when we talked to the first few people who were interested in buying this experience, what they said was that they wanted to get into space, but B, they wanted to see the views of Earth from space, and C, they wanted to enjoy the weightless experience. And so we provided a much larger cabin, capable of carrying up to 6 customers. We provided everybody with 2 large windows, so no arguing about who gets a window seat. Everybody gets a window seat. You have a window beside you, and you have a window above you, so you have 2 very large windows. And we provided a large cabin volume. with clever articulating seats that move out of the way and maximize that volume so that when you're in space, we're actually going to allow you to unstrap and float around and enjoy this incredible sensation of weightlessness. We also wanted a vehicle with a crew of 2 pilots for safety. So there we have a vehicle that is capable of carrying 8 people into space and back, and the only other vehicle that's done that is the Space Shuttle. But it uses the same technology that was used in Spaceship One, so it's carbon fiber composite material, very light, very strong material. It's got a special rocket motor, which I'll talk a little bit about later, a hybrid rocket motor, and it's got something called a feathering tail, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later as well. So to get it into space is a different challenge. So one of the really unusual things about Spaceship One and Spaceship Two is they are air-launched rockets. So the rocket is launched from about 47,000 feet. What are the reasons for that? There are many, but one of them is safety, so that if you launch your rocket from the ground and the motor fails after a few seconds, then that usually ends up in a disaster. Whereas with this vehicle, if you launch it at 47,000 feet and the motor only burns for a few seconds or doesn't light at all, it doesn't really matter. It's got wings. It's going to glide down and land at the runway. So that's one of the big advantages of air launching. And if we look at more traditional launch systems, here we have Apollo Saturn and the Space Shuttle. So these vehicles, Apollo Saturn went to the moon, obviously. Space Shuttles went into Earth orbit. So their roles are slightly different. But the interesting thing about them is the amount of fuel that you have to carry for a ground launch and to get into orbit. So let me see if I can make this work. It's always embarrassing the pilot can't make the controls work. But all of this here is fuel. That little part up there is where the lunar lander was stored, and then there's more fuel up there. So the only bit that came back to Earth was a tiny little conical part right up at the end that ended up in a museum. Everything else was thrown away. So if you can imagine flying from Hong Kong to London in a 747 and then throwing it away at the end, you get some idea of the costs involved in a space flight. Space Shuttle did a little bit better. Some of it was reusable. This is the orbiter, which was reusable, but it took an awful lot of engineering to turn it around for the next flight. But this huge orange tank here is entirely fuel, and the solid rocket boosters on this side there are also entirely fuel, and there's a lot more fuel on the orbiter itself. So to launch from the ground to get into space, rocket engines work most efficiently when the vehicle is traveling fast. So the rocket efflux, the exhaust of the rocket, comes out really quickly. So for maximum efficiency, the vehicle needs to be going quickly as well. And so they don't work very efficiently from a stationary ground launch. And so that's one reason you end up carrying a lot more fuel for a ground launch. And the other important characteristic is that the lower atmosphere is actually relatively dense. And if you're going at high speed in the lower atmosphere, you're consuming a huge amount of energy just to push the air out of the way. And this photograph here is of the Space Shuttle at around about 30,000 feet at a point that they call max Q, so maximum aerodynamic load on the vehicle. And you can see these huge shock waves forming all around the structure. And that needs a huge amount of energy to push through that barrier and overcome that. So there are great advantages to operating with an air launch vehicle. So in contrast to that previous slide, everything you see here comes back to Earth. So we have the first stage, the White Knight, the mothership, and the spaceship in the middle. Everything you see comes back. The only thing that doesn't come back is the fuel, which is consumed to get up there. So we have a much smaller spaceship carrying less fuel, and because it carries less fuel, it can be smaller, lighter, and so huge advantages there. So this is a very green system, very environmentally friendly. So let me take you through the preparation and the launch process. So here we are. You've seen a little bit of this building already from one of Stephen's slides. This we call the gateway to space, which is where the vehicles are going to be maintained and housed down in New Mexico. And it's also the building where the customers are going to be trained for their space flight. So now I want to, another little survey here. If you can honestly tell me that you listen entirely, you devote your entire attention to the safety brief on your last airline flight, can you stick your hands up, please? That's exactly the response I expected. So it's important for customers on a Virgin Galactic flight that they understand how the seat works, how the communication system works, because we're not going to have a flight attendant. You're kind of been largely looking after yourself back there. And the other important aspect of the flight from a customer point of view is that the sensation is going to be quite remarkable. So you will be subject to forces which you probably haven't been subject to before. So you have high G during boost, you have high G during re-entry, and you have this amazing weightless experience. We think all of those experiences are going to be really enjoyable, but if you were completely unprepared, they might be overwhelming. And we don't want you to be overwhelmed. We want you to have a really enjoyable experience. So with a little bit of training and a little introduction to what is going to happen to you, you'll get the most out of it and enjoy it even more. So the training happens there. And let me see, I can probably move it with this device. That's great. Then we move the vehicle to the end of the runway. We prepare it out there, and the customers are brought out when we're ready to go. Start up all the engines and take off. And the climb to launch altitude is about 47,000 feet. The climb up there takes the best part of an hour, around about 50 minutes or so. Why 47,000 feet? Well, as I said earlier on, we're above the thicker, lower, denser atmosphere. The air is much thinner up there. We can accelerate quicker up to the velocity we need to get to. And we only need to burn our rocket motor for a very short space of time, about 60 seconds to reach space from this altitude. As we're running into the release point, we go through the final checks and preparations, and we have a countdown to the release. The release itself is an interesting affair. So at that point, when White Knight, when the mothership releases spaceship, is actually dropping about 40% of its weight, so it springs up into the air. The pilots and the spaceship are holding forward control, so they fall away quite rapidly as well. And for the best part of an hour, you've been sitting underneath this four-engined aircraft, so just like being in any other airliner, you have this sort of background humming noise. And then when you release, the release itself, there's quite a harsh mechanical noise as the release mechanism disengages, and you fall away like going over the top of a roller coaster ride. And then for a few brief seconds, it's absolutely silent because there's no engine on the rocket motor. But that only lasts for about 3 seconds, and then we arm and we fire the rocket motor, and we're on for a very exciting ride. So there's the moment of release at 47,000 feet, and then we light the rocket motor. So the acceleration is really dramatic. It starts off at about 2.5 G, builds up to about 3.5 G. So what does that feel like? It's a very dramatic push in the bag. So we have these articulating seats. They're in a normal sort of comfortable position for the journey up to the release point. And prior to release, the seat backs come up into the bolt upright position. So you feel that acceleration in the transverse body direction. And that's easily supportable. But it's the same acceleration as you would feel if you were to launch off the front of an aircraft carrier, but that would last for 2 or 3 seconds. Or the only other way of getting that acceleration is to get hold of one of those really high-performance dragsters. And again, that only lasts for a few seconds, and they're a little bit tricky to ride. So this is a better way of getting that sensation. So the acceleration then is in the transverse body direction. And there's really nothing to do about that. You don't have to strain against it or anything like that. It's actually quite easily supportable. It feels, if you want to know what that feels like, lie in the back and put a couple of heavy books on your chest. And that's what it feels like. So you've got to work a little bit. As you're sitting there now, you're expanding your chest, but you're not really aware of it. But under that acceleration, you've got to work just a little bit, not very hard at all, to expand your chest. That's what that acceleration feels like. So we accelerate very rapidly. We come off horizontally. We're accelerating horizontally initially. We're dropping at about 160 miles an hour. And in 8 seconds, we go supersonic. As we go supersonic, There's a little bit of a pitch bubble, which you'd barely notice. And once that's done, then we start turning the corner and pointing the vehicle vertically upwards. All the time accelerating. The motor will burn for around about 60 seconds. And at the end of 60 seconds, we're at roughly 150,000 feet. We're going vertically upwards, and we're doing 3.5 times the speed of sound. And that's sufficient energy from that point onwards to coast all the way up into space. At 150,000 feet, the atmosphere is so thin, there's virtually no drag on the vehicle. And very shortly after that, we're going to raise the tail into this feather configuration, and I've got some slides to explain that in a moment. Almost as soon as the motor is shut down, you go from this tremendous push in the back, the 3.5 G push in the back, to 0 G. And at that point, we're going to allow our customers to unstrap and float around and experience 0 G. So if anybody's experienced 0 G in this room, it's an amazing sensation. So there are no forces on the body. I guess it's a little bit like scuba diving, but there's no water to damp any movement you're making. So you can gently push yourself away with a fingertip, and you will keep on moving in the direction you've pushed yourself until you bump into something else. It is a truly amazing sensation. And of course, the other thing is you've got these great big windows there, which you can float to and get views like this of Earth. And this picture was actually taken by Brian Binney on the final Spaceship One flight. So this is typical of the sort of view that you'd get from our spaceship. So we've ended up at 150,000 feet. The motor shut down. We're continuing up into space. The air is so thin, it really doesn't matter what direction you're traveling in at that point. We could go up backwards, sideways. It doesn't matter because there's essentially no drag in the vehicle. We've got a reaction control system, though, which is little puffer jets at the extremities of the vehicle. And with that, we can orientate the vehicle in any direction we want. And we think the best view is from there to just gently tip it over to the inverted position, because the windows are at the top and at the side. And by doing that, you'll be able to see the Earth racing away from you underneath, and you'll be able to look at the side and see the black sky of space in daytime and the very thin band of the atmosphere here around the planet. And we think those views are really going to be sensational. Pictures, you've probably all seen pictures like this in the past. Everybody that's been into space says that a picture does not tell the whole story. You've got to see this thing with your own eyes to really appreciate what an incredible view it is. So we get all the way up to apogee, and then we start to come down again for the re-entry phase. And so this is probably the signature technology on the vehicle. We have this thing called the feathering tail, where the aft section of the wing, unlike a flap on a normal regular airliner where it goes downwards, this flap goes upwards, and both tail booms go up as well. And what that does is it acts like a badminton shuttlecock. When it meets the atmosphere again, it will always put itself in the correct orientation for re-entry. And that is more or less with the forward fuselage parallel to the Earth's surface, and the forward section of the wing here, again, parallel to the Earth's surface. So as we're coming essentially vertically downwards, it's creating a huge amount of drag very high up in the atmosphere. And it almost acts like a parachute. So it slows us down high up in the atmosphere. We don't get too hot. We've got no complex parachute system or tile system as was installed on the space shuttle. And it really is quite an amazing technology. And this is, Stephen said that Burt Rutan was a genius, and to come up with a concept like this really was a stroke of genius. So the next slide is taken from a ground-based telescope, and that shows a picture of it in flight, of the feather system being used. So we come back down. At that point, the customers are back in their seats, and the seats are now in the fully reclined position. And so again, that deceleration force is felt in the transverse body direction. They're lying flat down, and they're sitting there getting up to about 5.5 G on re-entry. And if you're wondering if that's, if you'd be fit to do that, I bet you that the vast majority of people in this room would be fit to undergo those sort of accelerations. Once we are down around about 70,000 feet, we go subsonic again. So we re-enter at about 3.5 times the speed of sound as well. That's our peak speed. About 70,000 feet, we become subsonic, and at 60,000 feet, we lower the feather, and so the tail comes down again, and we become a conventional glider, and actually glides really well. And we come in for a normal, conventional runway landing. So that's the way the system works. So I'm sure you're all aware, on the 31st of October, we had a tragic accident. So Scale Composites, who built the vehicle and were doing the test line, lost our first spaceship over the Mojave Desert, and tragically one of the pilots was killed. So that was an awful day. So let me tell you where we are right now. The NTSB is carrying out the investigation, the National Transportation and Safety Bureau in the US. I am party to that investigation. I would love to talk more about it, but unfortunately I can't because the final report is not yet out. So we're still going through an interview process and gathering some evidence, but we did have a tremendous amount of evidence available to us straight away. So the vehicle was very highly instrumented. There were hundreds of parameters being telemetered down to our mission control, some of them hundreds of times per second, so a huge amount of data was available. So we were very quickly able to work out what happened. And if you were to go to the NTSB website, you would see that a mistake was made in the cockpit. So the focus is going to be on human error, why that mistake was made. And so we expect the report to be out very soon. In the meantime, Virgin Galactic is doing an end-to-end review of every system in both vehicles to make sure we're absolutely happy with the way they've been engineered and our backups and our human interaction with those systems. We have also invited an independent panel to review our fitness for flight. So we have a team of 5 nationally highly regarded people led by Vice Admiral William Bones in the US, who's a former head of Naval Command. And we have a Dr. Catherine Hughes, who is an expert on human factors and human performance. And so they're looking at our readiness of the vehicles and the systems and our crews to return to flight. When we do get back into test flight, the program will be led by Virgin Galactic, and all the flights will be crewed with Virgin Galactic pilots. So let me just introduce you to the team we've got. We have, apart from myself from the UK, everyone else is from the US. We have a variety of Air Force, Marine, NASA backgrounds, civilian as well as military. So hugely experienced pilots, some of the most experienced test pilots in the world. And many, many thousands of hours between us and many hundreds of different types of aircraft. So I just thought I'd give you a feel for some of the experience that we have. So we have ship operation ski jump with Harrier. We have F-16 Viper, very experienced guys. We have, there's the 1909 Blériot, which is great fun to fly. We have Mike Masucci, who's got many hundreds of hours in the U-2, which is one of the highest altitude flying aircraft ever built, and a very challenging aircraft to fly. We have Rick Sturko, CJ, who has flown the shuttle 4 times, each time to the International Space Station, and a very proud and experienced Marine pilot on the F-18 Hornet. And Mark Stuckey, who was working for Scaled up until earlier this year and has now joined us. He's got a lot of experience on White Knight and on the spaceship, and he's also flown the SR-71 Blackbird, which is a Mach 3.5 high-altitude strategic reconnaissance aircraft. And then we've got some civilian flying as well. So I flew with Virgin Atlantic. Mark Stuckey also flew with Delta Airlines for a short time, and Mike Masucci flew with Exojet. So we've got that commercial flying experience as well. So just to wrap up before I hand back to Stephen, there's a few things here that I just wanted to emphasize. Both vehicles have been deliberately designed to be as simple as possible, both White Knight and Spaceship. The rationale behind that is if you build a simple system, it's less likely to fail, and therefore it's inherently safer. If you build a complex system, you are more likely to have a failure. So we, or I should say Burt Rutan decided that both these vehicles would be extremely simple, and they are. We have that winged spaceship, which allows us to do a controlled re-entry using the feathering system to a runway landing, which is always a good way. It's much better to land on a runway than it is to splash down in the ocean and have the US Navy come and pick you up. The hybrid rocket motor. So yeah, let me talk briefly about that. There have been essentially two types of rocket motors. So liquid engines, rocket motors, solid rocket motors. Liquid engines are complex and require very precise engineering, take a long time to develop, but they're fully controllable. You can throttle them, you can shut them down, you can start them up. So there are advantages. Solid rocket boosters, as were attached to the side of the space shuttle, are very, very simple and easy to make. The disadvantage is that once they're lit, it's like your firework. Once it's lit, it will fire until it burns out. So if something were to go wrong, you can't shut it down. So that's something that we like the simplicity of that, but we didn't like the safety aspects of that. The hybrid motor is almost like a compromise between the two. So the hybrid motor has solid fuel, and if I had one here, I could bring it in and it would be perfectly safe at room temperature. And then it has an oxidizer tank with a valve on the end. We control the valve on the oxidizer tank, open it, release it over the fuel, ignite it, and that's our hybrid rocket motor. At any time, we can shut it down. And we also have a device which is monitoring many, many hundreds of parameters, and if it sees something it doesn't like, it will also shut it down. So that's the technology we're using, a very simple, almost as simple as a solid rocket booster, but with the safety of us being able to shut it down at any time. The air launch system, I've talked about that already. The reusability, we are very green. We reuse everything, all parts of the machinery. And the final point I wanted to make here is the flexibility. So we have a system where you can attach your spaceship to your mothership, and then you can fly your mothership to wherever in the world you have permission to launch. So that is something very, very unusual. So the space shuttle and those other traditionally vertically launched rockets, they require very complex ground systems to launch them. We don't need that. We just need a regular runway to launch from and to land back on. So that's a huge benefit of our system. Stephen, back over to you.
Thank you very much, Dave. So let me finish off. You know, one of the things that I also, when I was speaking to Richard, first of all, in that back in 2004, I think what became very evident was that what we're doing is not only going to be fun, it's certainly cutting edge, it's also really important. And as I said earlier on, you know, some of the greatest technologies we have came from initial investment by government, and space is certainly one of those. We have billions of dollars and man-hours and lives given as well over the last half a century or so, which we want to build on. And what you often see is when that government technology, which has served a really important purpose, but in maybe a slightly clunky way, gets released to the private sector, then exciting things happen. And that's what we are taking this first step in trying to achieve with the spaceship that Dave has just been talking about. And we think there is a transformation going on. This is a really exciting time in commercial space. We're seeing some very interesting dynamics at the moment. There's a lot of money going into the sector. I think we mentioned the investment that ABBA made in Virgin Galactic. We wondered if the time of that would be a bit of a Netscape moment, if you like, for commercial space, a realization on behalf of mainstream investors that we were entering the second space age and the enormous potential and advantages in many areas of life that could bring. So where do I think this business is going to go? Well, as we've said, you know, we want to start off with space tours, and that's, you know, probably what we're best known for, private space travel. You can call it Galactic Space Tours if you want. When I was back right at the start in 2004, Virgin asked us to go and make sure that if we were going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, if we were going to spend a lot of time building these remarkable vehicles and testing them, that when we got there, there would be somebody other than Richard that actually wanted to fly. So we were asked to go out and find some early customers. We tend to announce early at Virgin. We tend to tell the story, warts and all, and we like having people on board that are actually going to be using the products because you end up with a better product. And so it was an interesting exercise. We set up a little website. We played the film on the website of Spaceship One flying. And we said, look, we'd like to sell some tickets. We don't know when the product will be delivered. We don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know what the experience is going to be. We don't know whether you'll be eligible to fly. But if you'd like to reserve a seat, please send $200,000. And I can remember sitting back a bit nervously thinking, this is not the way I'm used to doing business, actually. And about that time, actually, I was just reminded that the PR guy from Virgin came up to me and said, look, while you're waiting to see whether anybody wants to buy a ticket, the Sunday Times in the UK want to do a little bit of a story, and you coming from fund management to Virgin Galactic, could you think of something witty and send it to me in a couple of minutes' time? Oh, God, what am I going to say? So the only thing I could come up with at the time was that, I've spent the last 10 years talking about products going up and down. I expect I'm going to spend the next 10 years talking about products going up and down, but I need this time to make it a promise, not a warning. And I'm not sure it was that funny, but it was all I could come up with. And a remarkable thing happened. The website virtually crashed over that first weekend. We had hundreds and then thousands of registrations, and we thought, this is sensational. They were coming from all the way around, all around the world. And I sat down on the Monday morning and started looking through these registrations. And typically in the comments box at the bottom, it said, if anybody can make this dream come true, it's Richard Branson and Burt Rutan. I've been waiting for this moment for all of my life. It's important, and it's going to happen. And if I ever have $200,000, I will definitely buy a ticket. And I started to think, I should have stayed in fund management. But amongst those registrations were also some amazing comments boxes which said all the same things I've just said. And at the bottom, though, it said, I'm in the privileged position to have the $200,000. Tell me where to send the check, because I know how important it will be for this industry to have people that are willing to step up to the plate early and prove that there is a readily available market at a commercially viable price. And we very, very quickly built that $10 million of deposits that Virgin had asked us to build before they pressed the button to get this show on the road. And they are the most remarkable group of people. I think one of the great things about adventures are the people that you meet along the way. And this group of very diverse backgrounds. Sure, we have celebrities, we have billionaires. We also, though, have people who've mortgaged their homes in order to do this. They come from, I think, around 60 countries around the world now. They're early adopters. They're a crazy bunch, but we've had a lot of good adventures with them. I think they love being part of the journey as much as going to space themselves. And without them, I can genuinely say, we would not have a business. And one of the most impressive things that came out of that really shocking day we had last year was that we didn't lose those people. They stuck with us, they supported us because they recognize, why we test and the importance of sticking to our goals. So that's the first market. Somebody, I think, mentioned earlier on that we can do other things with these vehicles in this operation. Science has been done in space for a long time. Scientists have recognized for many years that you can do some very smart science in a very different environment that space presents. The trouble with most things in space is that getting there is really hard. It's very expensive, and it's limited availability. With Virgin Galactic, we potentially have this incredible science lab. So the spaceship, which generally takes me and you, can be, the seats can be taken out. We can put racks in instead. And so we can do very cheap science with scientists on board, and that's really important. And I hope it will also be a big inspiration to kids that are deciding whether to become fund managers or scientists, that occasionally they'll decide to become scientists because you can go to space as a scientist as well as a fund manager. That's exciting. And in fact, the first people that bought a ticket on board Virgin Galactic to do science in space were NASA. So I think we're probably onto a good thing there. Now, Virgin Atlantic has had a cargo department for many years, and we thought we better have one as well. So Virgin Galactic Cargo, I think, will be the next thing that comes out of this business. But rather than taking parcels around the world, we're going to be launching small satellites into space. And this is an area you should look at as investors, because there is a lot happening here. Satellites, there's a bit of a Moore's law for satellites, I think, that they're getting smaller and smarter and cheaper and lighter. There is an insatiable demand for real-time information, for communications data, which these satellites can produce. But getting them there is really hard because, again, the rockets are expensive. There are not many of them. And typically what happens if that you own a small satellite, and most of us could own a small satellite, they're not that expensive these days. But to get them into space is tough. So typically what you need to do is to find somebody who's got a big satellite and try and find a corner in the payload compartment, stick your little satellite in there, and go and get into space that way. The trouble with that is that you go at a time that the big customer wants, and you go to a place that the big customer wants. And that's not ideal, but it's often the only way that customers with small satellites can get those vehicles into space. So what we want to do, and somebody gave me this analogy the other day, and I think it's a really good one, is to sort of transform the small satellite delivery market from the sort of the octopus card to an Uber ride, so that you can actually get your small satellite delivered when you want it, when you want it to be launched and to the right place. So rather than having the spaceship strapped onto the mothership, we have what looks like a big missile or a rocket, which has a few small satellites in the nose, and we can launch those from a runway rather than a range very flexibly, very regularly, and very cheaply, we believe. Just to give you an example of what that could mean, there's a lot of interest at the moment in internet connectivity. I think more people in the world don't have internet access at the moment than do, believe it or not. And by launching a large array, maybe 600 or so small satellites into a fairly low Earth orbit, you would be able to bring very cheap, reliable, high-powered internet to every human being on this planet, into their homes or onto mobile devices. And we're actually involved at Virgin with a company that is looking to do that, a company called OneWeb. And that is exciting, I think, from an investment point of view, and something that I think will complement and leverage the investment that we've made in vehicles and infrastructure. And what about the distant future, just to finish off with? I saw a remarkable picture at the Hong Kong Aviation Club a couple of days ago of an aerial view of the old airport, and sitting on the apron, believe it or not, was Concorde. I didn't even realize it came to Hong Kong, but it obviously did. And you know, when Concorde was flying, there were a lot of people around that thought that we would all be flying supersonic within a few years. In fact, the 747 was built to transfer into a cargo plane because they thought it would have a very short lifespan as a passenger airliner. That didn't happen. So where are we going to go with commercial aviation? Because the current model isn't really sustainable. You know, it's punching our way through the atmosphere using fossil fuels is probably not a good long-term plan. Well, we think one of the things that could come out of this business is that we sort of leapfrog supersonic, and we start thinking about traveling from one point on the Earth to another via space, intercontinental point-to-point travel via space. I don't know what that vehicle is going to look like, but I do know that without doing what we're doing right at the moment, which is proving you can put you and me into space on a regular basis with the reliability and safety of an airline, is going to be an essential step if we're going to be able to fly from London to Australia in a couple of hours, which is theoretically important. I always say that you'll probably get there in a couple of hours, but you'll also have to queue for a couple of hours at immigration. But we'll try and sort that one out as well. Anyway, that's, I think, where we pretty much end. Hopefully a few times for minutes for questions. I would like to play one short movie to you. This is Powered Flight 3, we call it. It was the third powered flight. Dave was at the controls of the spaceship. They're real pictures. Sometimes we're accused that they're not real pictures. We have great cameras on the spaceship. So let's have a look at that, and then hopefully we can chat and have some questions. Thank you.
All right, guys, have a good flight. See you. Thanks, Suji. All right. High fast, man. High fast.
Thank you.
Well, we're actually over time, so we have time for maybe just a couple of questions. We're going into our buffer zone. So first question, please. Okay, on the right side.
An obvious question, I'm sorry to be so dull, but pressurization, I mean, how's that handled? You haven't mentioned that in the introduction.
Really simply, as you would expect from the design philosophy. So the cabin is actually pressurized, spaceship cabin is pressurized at 5,000 feet. So on a regular airline flight, your cabin altitude can get up to about 6.5, maybe towards the end of the flight about 6,800 or so. So we're actually flying at a more comfortable cabin altitude than you do in a regular airline.
The lady over here, I think.
Apologies if you've mentioned this before, but how long is the whole flight? Like, how long are you up there weightless?
It's about 2 hours from getting on board to landing again. The weightless part of it, the weightless portion, is about 3.5 to 4 minutes. So it's time to have a lot of fun.
My second question is, in NASA, when they launch rockets, there's quite a bit of amount of people on the ground in the control center, and I know you didn't really touch upon that. So how many individuals, I guess, kind of the overhead in terms of ground control is there?
So in terms of we have a mission control that's primarily for these test flights. So I guess the other thing which I didn't touch on is that traditionally, space vehicles like the shuttle are hugely complex, and not all the information required can be displayed in the cockpit of those vehicles. So NASA tends to have very large, very highly manned mission controls. With our vehicles, because they're both simple and the way the information is displayed to the crews, we don't necessarily need that. We will start off with that. We certainly, for test flying, we have it. There's a lot of parameters that we need to monitor. But when we get into commercial flight, we'll probably have a smaller team as well. But eventually, we envisage downsizing that ground support team, we're calling it mission support, to a very small number. So at the moment, we have typically about 20, 25 people, depending on what the test is on mission control. Maintainers, we have a team, let me think, I think we have a team of about 8 to 10 people looking after each vehicle. But again, a lot of maintenance right now, or a lot of checking after every flight. And again, we envisage that those teams are shrinking in size. So compared to the NASA operation, it's really small team sizes.
Based on your current cash burn rate, how long are you funded for?
This has been a 10-year startup, and we're fine to get over to get to the finish line. We have generous and patient investors, I'm pleased to say. Although, if you know any others, then
You've got a room full of them. One more question, I'm afraid. It's that gentleman over there, in the middle.
You mentioned the majority of people can fly in this room. What are the people who can definitely not fly, health-wise or others?
Are you pregnant?
Long time ago.
No, so we do have a system. So if you were a prospective passenger, we'd ask you to go to one of several doctors, aerospace qualified doctors that we have around the world for an examination. And then when you arrive at spaceport, our own doctor would do just a brief check as well, just to make sure that you haven't, twisted the arm of the doctor that you went to see. So not I'm saying you would do that, of course, but so there is a system. But it does turn out, genuinely, it does turn out that the very, very high percentage of the general population is fit to do this. You don't have to be a highly trained, young fighter pilot to do it. It's doable. We have, there's a centrifuge that we took a lot of our customers to, and that allows them to feel the forces that they will feel during a space flight apart from the zero-G phase. And that was hugely successful. And I think we even had an 88-year-old Japanese lady that went through that and really enjoyed it. In fact, everyone enjoyed it so much we were wondering why we were bothering to build a spaceship.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our two speakers today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.